February 22nd, 2023. Well, we've seen that President Biden has had a heroic trip to Kyiv uh, and met with Zelensky, and then came back and made a rousing speech in Warsaw, Poland, I guess, the audience there, adding to his historical identifications the fact that he's kind of Polish at heart, anyhow. I understand that they wanted to have an SKI at the end of his name or something like that. At any rate, and on the other hand, Russian President Putin made a lengthy speech outlining why the West was responsible for everything that happened and was at the fault of the war. And of course, and so it goes. Meanwhile, the war grinds on. Um, but well, the judge said, who's at fault in the war? I guess at first, being even-handed, you say it's kind of about 50-50 from a certain point of view, or maybe a little bit more Putin's fault from the one point of view, or more a little more our fault from another point of view. And those points of view are the following. I mean, uh, uh, you can always say since they actually attacked, as the Russians, you say it's their fault because they could have simply chose not to attack. I mean, obviously. But on the other hand, what would their consequences have been of not attacking? That's another issue from their point of view. And remember, the Russians tend to have a slightly paranoid view of the world, I think. Historically, I tend to think so. And when you're playing around in their backyard, I think they tend to take it rather. Let's put it this way: suppose that a hostile power was organizing people in a neighboring country, let's say a Mexico or a Canada, to take some kind of action against our interests. We might do something too. After all, the United States has invaded several countries in the last many years, so often with UN approval, I guess. But that just shows you have the economic and diplomatic strength to do these things. On the other hand, I certainly don't think that Russia should have invaded Ukraine. I don't think that was a good move on their part. Look at the price they're paying. But on the other hand, have we really done Ukraine a favor either? I mean, we've got them into this war. They didn't have to. We could have prevented this from happening by making a few reasonable, modest concessions that wouldn't have really put Ukraine at risk and wouldn't have put our national security interests at risk either. But we decided to be really obstinate and allow this process to continue when it was pretty clear it was about to happen. So anyhow, look at it however you want to. It's going on and it's going to continue to go on. And now we have an ongoing situation with China. One gets the feeling that China is providing at least some covert aid to Russia even at this point. Probably semiconductor chips and things of that sort, and maybe commercial drones and things of that sort. I don't know I haven't really checked to see how compatible their ammunition types. I know the rifle ammunition is completely incompatible now, but I don't know about other things. Historically they would have been compatible back when the Chinese were armed with the Type 56, but now that they're using a different rifle, it's a bullpup with a 5.8 millimeter round. I just don't get too off on those details, but I suppose some of those hypersonic missiles could be of interest, though. Huh? So we'll see what happens. I know we're warning China not to do it, so there we go. So anyhow, by the way, if you like these videos, please give me a like. It should help with the algorithm, and of course, more subscriptions are appreciated. Yeah, we're so going on with this. Well, I guess basically from Biden's point of view, we're simply saying that essentially we're in it to win it. We're going to go all the way with Ukraine. Although the latest contribution to the $500 million is kind of piddly compared to other allotments we've given, which means maybe we're kind of running low on things to give right now. I mean, I understand that the promised tanks have really not turned out quite as promised as would be. They're way delayed. A lot of the European tanks were in disrepair and have to be refurbished before they can be shipped, and so forth. And of course, so on that side, on the Russian side, I guess the main thing they did was to decide to withdraw from the START treaty, which they kind of tacitly agreed to continue, um, before the conflict broke out. And now they're going to pull out of it, which basically means that they aren't going to allow on-site inspections. I don't know that we were allowing any lately anyhow either. I mean, I think that some of that broke down even back during Trump, I think. So basically, the arms control is kind of off. On the other hand, I'm not sure how much real significance that will have because, I mean, on the one hand, we don't really have anything really in production to build in the near term, and they, on the other hand, have economic constraints that are such that can they afford to build it a whole lot. I mean, they're committed to the modernization of their heavy ICBMs, their new Sarmat missile that they're touting a lot, which would be about 46 units, I guess, to put in existing silos. And I guess the U.S. side, one thing we could do is we have warheads in storage that we could, increase the warhead counts on, for instance, our SLBMs. I'm not sure we'd even want to do it on the ICBMs because I think we kind of like the longer range we're getting maybe with the one warhead mount on the Minuteman IIIs. Because after all, we have to consider that China is becoming an emerging threat also. And of course, that would, be an issue that we're going to increasingly need to have targeting against Chinese targets as well. And if we're at a rough parity with the Russians, essentially, that means Russia doesn't have to really target China probably, and certainly not with intercontinental weapons, but to any great extent. So it's I don't know much is going to come of that. It's just sort of a diplomatic bad news thing. In the long run, it might lead to something. But strangely enough, for instance, our plans, at least going forward on submarines, is to replace the current submarines with the what's called Columbia class ships with only carry 16 missiles rather than the potential 24 on the Ohio class. But really, we're going down to only 20 because of the arms control treaty. We've already done that. So I mean, that's Anyway, this kind of gives you an idea of what the impact of that is. I think it's minor in the near term. It might be major in the longer term, potentially. Certainly. Anyway, that's that. The war itself is continuing. Kind of briefly go into what I think about that. As I've been following things, what we're seeing is that the Russians are clearly on the offensive, I think. There's certainly been cases where they've had reversals in some battles. And you can, on other areas, they seem to be slowly but surely gaining ground. The encirclement of Bakhmut is kind of proceeding, although there's apparently a dispute has broken out between the Russian army and the Wagner Group mercenaries. And apparently it's kind of over logistical supplies for the mercenaries. Probably there's a bit of an ego contest going on because the fact is the mercenaries have kind of been doing better than the regular army has and have been hogging all the glory, so to speak, as well as, I guess, all the gory, giving all the deaths. But but the point is that they're, in the conflict and have been taking ground early on, and so they're getting a lot of credit. And I suppose, this stuff even happens with allied armies. Remember the Montgomery versus Patton ego contest in Syria, in Sicily back in World War II, in 43, so I think these things happen, and particularly because you have a private group and you have official national group, I don't know how serious that's going to be in the long run. I guess that gives the Ukrainians a little hope there. As I have heard that Ukrainians are running low on ammunition, and I think they've been taking some pretty heavy casualties in some of these bombardments, since most of the battles have been artillery, really, and Russia's been firing a lot more rounds, and both sides now have drones for targeting. So it seems like it's kind of dangerous to get up and attack somebody out there. That's for sure. I mean, but I think that we're seeing slow but sure movement forward by the Russians. But the Ukrainians are putting up a stiff resistance. And so we'll see if things are going to change. One thing you have to understand, though, is that the bulk of the Russian military hasn't been committed yet in terms of actual combat. Many of them may actually be inside the internationally recognized sovereign territory of Ukraine, but they're not all on the front line, really. For one thing, I think a certain amount of troops are being held back for either a future offensive in the south or at a minimum as a counter force in case the Ukrainians were to launch their long-awaited offensive. So that's one thing that's in play. There's other units that are up in western Russia near Kharkiv, I think, that are perhaps preparing for something in the future here. And there's ongoing discussion about what's going on in Belarus and in that area. So I really don't buy the stories that are being put out that Russia is planning on attacking a NATO country. I don't see them. That would be a completely insane thing to do at this stage, given their other difficulties. They don't need that problem. I don't think they're going to bring it on themselves voluntarily. Um, but you know, there are some people out there that are worried about that. I think there could be a lot of this could be diversionary, or the Western hook strategy might be attempted. But I have understood, though, that slowly but surely, with all these drones we've heard about from Iran and other things, um, that the Ukrainian air defenses have actually been worn down considerably. And like just like I've seen some other sources suggesting that like that these outrageously excessive claims of Ukrainian shoot downs of Russian cruise missiles are actually bogus. In fact, most of the Russian cruise missiles are actually penetrating and hitting targets. So that is probably not the case. The idea that they shoot down 80% of them or not, that's fantasy, I think. And in many ways, I think their stocks of anti-aircraft missiles have been worn down for all the months, nearly a year of combat. So, and the Russians seem to be developing better air tactics than they've had previously. So that's another thing that will probably be coming into play more. Is watching various videos that are put on YouTube from various sources. I mean, certainly all the Western sources, you get pretty much any good news that's out there for Ukraine. There is a source called the Hindustani Times. It's a Indian source, and it seems to be very pro-Russian. So if you want to see the Russian side of the propaganda war, that's a place you can look for it. And the thing I would say is all these claims that the Russians are engaged in, you know, these human wave attacks. I've seen no evidence of this at all. I mean, they're engaged in attacks, but they're done more or less like any competent infantry force would do, you know, and they seem to be often leading with their, in many cases, with their infantry, with the tanks coming up to provide fire support. This isn't a blitzkrieg, it's a slow grinding type conflict. Obviously, the casualties are probably high on both sides, but anyway, we'll just have to continue to watch and see what happens, whether the pace picks up. Some people think that something will happen this Friday, which will be the official first anniversary of the war breaking out, and we'll see if that actually is a schedule or not. But anyway, that's kind of my take on the situation, and we'll just have to keep watching what happens. The main thing I would say, though, is that we need to, I think, get away from the idea of escalating this conflict and try to see if we can negotiate an end to it, if possible. I mean, of course, we don't know everything that's happened behind the scenes. There was a report that there was an attempt at that some time back, and that both Ukraine and Russia rejected it. But whether that's true or not, I don't know. But that's something else that's sort of in the wind out there. Basically, because Ukraine wants all their territory back, and Russia thinks they can win the war. That was the version I'd heard. So we'll see how that's kind of an impasse. So anyway, and I'll be wrapping this up for now. And as always, I'll of course be posting this on Rumble, which is kind of at this point still a backup channel. I get a few hits on there from time to time. I'd like to see that to grow, and if possible. And anyhow, it's an archive just in case YouTube turns hostile on me, which they haven't so far. And of course, the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. And until next time.